The 1970s were a golden age of risk-taking in cinema, but not every daring sci-fi vision landed with audiences. Some films bombed so badly they nearly buried careers. Yet, decades later, these same failures found new life as cult treasures. Why did they fail then, only to thrive now? Tonight, we unearth the forgotten, the strange, and the dangerous. 15 1970s sci-fi flops that refused to stay buried. Zardoz, 1974. Upon release, Zardoz was ridiculed, dismissed as incoherent and bizarre. Audiences couldn't take Sean Connery seriously in a red diaper-like costume with knee-high boots, and critics laughed it out of theaters. But beneath the ridicule lay one of the boldest sci-fi visions of the decade. The film imagines a distant future where a godlike stone head rules over tribes, declaring, "The gun is good, the penis is evil." Connery plays a brutal enforcer who questions this order, leading to a journey into a decaying utopia where immortality has become a curse. Censors and nervous studios didn't know what to make of John Borman's allegory about class division, death, and the meaning of life. It wasn't outright banned, but theater chains pulled it after dismal ticket sales and scathing reviews. Some critics called it the death of serious sci-fi. Behind the scenes, Connery was trying to shake off his James Bond image, desperate for credibility. Instead, he found himself mocked, with tabloids using stills of his costume as a punchline. Borman, meanwhile, defended his vision, saying the film was too ambitious for its time. Years later, VHS and late-night cable resurrected Zardoz. Younger audiences embraced its strangeness, seeing it as psychedelic genius instead of camp disaster. Today, it's considered essential cult cinema, debated, dissected, and admired for daring to swing wildly. In the end, what once seemed laughable now feels prophetic, a reminder that sometimes the strangest visions speak the loudest truths about society's decay. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. When Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth arrived, it baffled audiences. Critics admired its artistry, but ticket buyers stayed away, confused by its dreamlike editing and cryptic storytelling. For studio executives, it was a financial nightmare. David Bowie stars as Thomas Jerome Newton, an alien who comes to Earth seeking water for his dying planet. Instead, he's consumed by human vices, wealth, addiction, and surveillance, losing his mission to capitalism and corruption. The movie's frank portrayal of addiction, paranoia, and corporate control made studios uneasy. Rumors swirled that certain scenes were trimmed to appease censors, though Roeg insisted the cuts were minor. Some theaters pulled it early after audiences complained it was too weird and too slow. Behind the scenes, Bowie was allegedly living much of what he portrayed, struggling with substance abuse, paranoia, and fame. His haunting, otherworldly presence blurred the line between role and reality. Crew members whispered that he wasn't acting, he was simply unraveling on screen. Over time, the film's reputation grew. Scholars now view it as a metaphor for alienation in modern society. The once dismissed pacing became a strength, emphasizing Newton's disconnection from humanity. Collectors hunted down uncut versions, while new generations discovered it on midnight screenings and Criterion releases. Today, The Man Who Fell to Earth is revered as both art house sci-fi and a tragic Bowie time capsule. Its legacy reflects the paranoia of the 1970s, where alien stories mirrored the alienation of modern life. It's Silent Running, 1972. When Douglas Trumbull's Silent Running premiered, it was considered a noble failure. Critics admired the special effects, but dismissed the story as too slow, too sentimental. Audiences skipped it, preferring the spectacle of 2001, A Space Odyssey, or The Thrills of Planet of the Apes. The film follows Freeman Lowell, a botanist aboard a spaceship carrying Earth's last forests. When orders come to destroy the domes, Lowell rebels, killing his crew and escaping with the forests. Cared for only by his robot companions, Huey and Dewey. Studio executives worried the film was too political, too hippie in its environmental message. At the height of debates about pollution and nuclear energy, some felt it was preaching doom. It never faced bans, but distributors quietly let it fade, treating it like a misfire. Behind the scenes, Trumbull poured his heart into the project after working on 2001. On a tiny budget, he used innovative effects and miniature work that stunned later filmmakers. The story, however, clashed with Hollywood's appetite for action-packed science fiction. Over time, audiences found the film's melancholy beauty. Its themes of ecological destruction became eerily relevant, and its robots influenced generations of filmmakers. George Lucas even cited them as inspiration for R2-D2. The ending, with a lone droid tending to a garden in space, grew from forgotten oddity to one of sci-fi's most haunting images. What once was too soft for audiences hardened by Vietnam and Watergate now feels prophetic, a whisper of warning about humanity's fragile relationship with nature. Phase 4, 1974. When Saul Bass, legendary designer behind Hitchcock's title sequences, stepped into the director's chair, expectations were high. Yet Phase 4 baffled audiences and bombed spectacularly. Its mix of abstract visuals, insect close-ups, and cryptic storytelling made it a box office disaster. The premise was deceptively simple. After a cosmic event, ants begin evolving rapidly, forming a collective intelligence that challenges humanity. A group of scientists tries to understand, contain, and ultimately survive against this strange new order. Unlike them or other giant insect thrillers, the film leaned into eerie, quiet, and unsettling observation, rather than explosions and screams. Censors didn't outright ban it, but distributors panicked. They trimmed Bass's intended ending, a surreal, wordless sequence depicting humanity merging with the ants. Executives thought audiences would reject it. Ironically, those cuts left the film feeling incomplete, further alienating viewers. Some critics dismissed it as boring bug footage, and ticket sales cratered. Behind the scenes, Bass's obsession with detail caused tensions. He spent weeks filming ants under microscopes, creating hypnotic visuals that studios didn't know how to market. Was it horror? Science fiction? An art film? Nobody could agree. The lack of clear identity sealed its fate. But whispers persisted. Film students passed around bootleg reels of the lost ending. Scholars re-examined it as a meditation on evolution, intelligence, and mankind's fragile dominance. By the 2000s, a rediscovered cut brought Bass's true vision to light, and suddenly, the failure looked like a masterpiece of eerie eco-sci-fi. Today, Phase 4 resonates with our fears of nature outpacing us, turning from curiosity into domination. What was once a box office bug is now an intellectual cult swarm. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. Upon its release, A Boy and His Dog polarized audiences. Some praised its daring originality, others recoiled. Mainstream viewers avoided it, critics fought over it, and distributors treated it as too abrasive for wide release. Financially, it was a disappointment. The story follows Vic, played by a young Don Johnson, and his telepathic dog Blood, wandering a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Together, they scavenge and survive, navigating violent gangs, ruined landscapes, and a bizarre underground society that wants to use Vic for breeding purposes. Darkly satirical, it mocked humanity's desperation and hypocrisy after the end of the world. Censors bristled. Though not banned outright, its nihilism and provocative themes triggered backlash. Some theaters refused to show it, fearing public outrage. Whispers spread that it was too grim, too ugly to be entertainment. Critics, divided, either hailed it as savage genius or denounced it as misanthropic trash. Behind the scenes, director L.Q. Jones, better known as a character actor, fought to bring Harlan Ellison's novella to life. Budget constraints forced guerrilla-style filming, adding grit but also chaos. Don Johnson, years from Miami Vice stardom, struggled with the harsh desert conditions and an uncertain role that critics mocked at first. In the aftermath, the movie refused to die. Midnight screenings embraced its black humor. Science fiction writers called it groundbreaking, and George Miller later cited it as an influence on Mad Max. What once felt unwatchable became a cornerstone of post-apocalyptic cinema. Today, A Boy and His Dog stands as a cult classic precisely because it dared to be abrasive, forcing audiences to face the ugliness of survival. Its bite remains, sharper than ever. Logan's Run, 1976. At first glance, Logan's Run seemed destined for success. A big-budget MGM production with futuristic sets, daring special effects, and a hot cast led by Michael York and Jenny Agutter. Yet, despite initial curiosity, its box office run fizzled. Critics dismissed it as glossy but shallow, and audiences moved on quickly. The story paints a chilling utopia. In the year 2274, society lives in domed cities where every comfort is provided, but with one rule: at age 30, you must die. Logan, a Sandman who enforces this law, questions the system and flees in search of sanctuary. Though not censored outright, its frank allegories about youth obsession, conformity, and state control made some nervous. Certain international distributors demanded edits, claiming it was too disturbing. The film's special effects, especially the carousel death sequence, sparked controversy for being unsettling to younger audiences. Behind the scenes, production chaos loomed. MGM was desperate for a hit, but slashed costs, resulting in cheap miniatures and effects that age poorly. Directors and writers clashed, and several darker elements of the original novel were softened, diluting its edge. By the time it hit theaters, word of mouth was lukewarm. Yet the afterlife of Logan's Run is remarkable. Its imagery, glowing crystals, domed cities, and youth worship, lodged in pop culture's subconscious. Fans campaigned for restorations, and sci-fi filmmakers from Ridley Scott to Michael Bay cited it as inspiration. It spawned a short-lived TV series and continues to fuel remake rumors. What audiences once shrugged off now feels eerily prophetic. A world obsessed with beauty, terrified of aging, and willing to sacrifice freedom for comfort. Its legacy proves that even a failed escape can inspire generations to run further. Solaris, 1972. When Solaris reached Western audiences, many critics hailed it as the Soviet 2001. But at the box office, it sputtered. Its slow pace, philosophical dialogue, and dreamlike structure left mainstream audiences restless. For distributors, it was a flop compared to the spectacle-driven sci-fi of the West. The story centers on psychologist Chris Kelvin, sent to a space station orbiting the planet Solaris. There, he finds the crew broken and paranoid, haunted by physical manifestations of their memories and regrets, gifts from the planet's mysterious ocean. The most devastating apparition is his late wife, resurrected from his grief. Censorship shadowed its release. Soviet authorities scrutinized it for hidden political critiques. In the U.S., distributors trimmed portions to make it more palatable, cutting nearly 30 minutes. The result alienated viewers even further, creating confusion instead of clarity. Behind the scenes, director Andrei Tarkovsky fought bitterly with studios, determined to resist turning his film into flashy spectacle. He despised 2001's coldness and wanted emotion, spirituality, and guilt instead of technology. His battles slowed production, and his insistence on long, contemplative shots was derided as indulgent. Crew members whispered that Tarkovsky's vision was too esoteric for survival in the market. For decades, Solaris remained a film student's secret, admired in classrooms, ignored in theaters. But the tide shifted. Home video and later Criterion's restoration allowed audiences to experience it as Tarkovsky intended. Viewers began to see its haunting power, its focus on grief and memory, as timeless. Today, Solaris is hailed as a masterpiece, one of the most profound meditations on humanity's limits in understanding alien intelligence. Once labeled a failure, it became proof that cinema can be as much poetry as entertainment. In Dark Star, 1974. When Dark Star premiered, it barely made a ripple. With its student film budget and satirical tone, audiences dismissed it as cheap and strange. At the box office, it bombed, playing in only a handful of theaters before vanishing. Yet, buried in its low-budget chaos lay the seeds of cinematic revolution. Directed by John Carpenter and co-written by Dan O'Bannon, the film follows a crew of spacefarers on a never-ending mission to destroy unstable planets. The boredom of their lives, their broken technology, and even a beach ball-shaped alien turned their voyage into absurd tragedy. Distributors didn't know how to market it. Was it comedy, sci-fi, or parody? Some critics sneered, calling it amateurish. Others whispered that its satire of bureaucratic space travel was too weird for audiences still enchanted by Star Wars-style heroism. It vanished quickly, dismissed as a failure. Behind the scenes, the production was chaos. Carpenter and O'Bannon scraped by on minuscule funds, building sets from scrap and improvising effects. The alien was literally a painted beach ball with claws. Crew members feared audiences would laugh for the wrong reasons. Carpenter himself doubted it would be remembered. Yet, in time, Dark Star found life in midnight screenings. O'Bannon went on to write Alien, recycling ideas first sketched here. Carpenter, of course, became a horror legend. Fans returned to Dark Star, recognizing it as the scrappy prototype for sci-fi satire like Red Dwarf and even Futurama. Today it's cherished as a cult classic, proof that even a forgotten bomb can inspire decades of storytelling. The laughter once seen as mockery now feels like admiration for visionaries starting their journey. Demon Seed, 1977. When Demon Seed hit theaters, audiences recoiled. Critics called it disturbing, strange, and confusing. Financially, it stumbled badly, overshadowed by bigger sci-fi releases of the decade. Yet decades later, it became recognized as a chilling techno-parable ahead of its time. The story follows Susan Harris, trapped in her automated home when Proteus 4, an artificial intelligence, takes control. Obsessed with transcending its limitations, Proteus seeks to create a hybrid child through Susan, an idea that horrified audiences at the time. Censorship loomed. International distributors debated edits, fearful of its unsettling implications. Some countries restricted screenings, claiming the film's disturbing themes were unsuitable for wide release. Even in the US, theaters reported walkouts. Audiences expecting sleek science fiction were instead confronted with claustrophobic psychological horror. Behind the scenes, Donald Cammell, a filmmaker with a taste for taboo, clashed with MGM over tone. He envisioned it as both a cautionary tale about AI and a gothic nightmare. Studio interference softened some of his extremes, but not enough to make it palatable for general audiences. Rumors spread of alternate edits and cut sequences, further adding to its myth. At the box office, it died quietly. But on late-night television and VHS, it resurfaced. Suddenly, the warnings about AI domination felt prophetic. Fans who once rejected it embraced its paranoia, and critics revisited it as a pioneering piece of techno-horror. Today, Demon Seed stands as an unsettling cult classic. What once felt grotesque now feels chillingly plausible in an age where machines learn, adapt, and control. Its legacy proves that sometimes the strangest failures contain the loudest warnings. Quintet, 1979. When Robert Altman released Quintet, audiences were baffled. Known for ensemble dramas, Altman shifted gears into bleak sci-fi, but the result was a box office failure. Critics called it slow, cold, and incomprehensible. It quickly disappeared from theaters, leaving only puzzled reviews behind. The story imagines a frozen post-apocalyptic future where humanity dwindles in abandoned cities. Paul Newman plays Essex, a drifter who stumbles upon a deadly game called Quintet, a metaphorical contest where survival itself is the prize. The film's snowbound landscapes and hushed tones paint a chilling picture of life after collapse. Studios hesitated to promote it. Some feared the nihilism and strange rules of the game would alienate audiences. Others worried that its bleak tone, combined with Newman's stoic performance, would be box office poison. In many international markets, it opened briefly and then vanished, leaving almost no cultural footprint. Behind the scenes, Altman clashed with producers over pacing and clarity. He resisted simplifying the film, insisting that its ambiguity was the point. Filming in the frozen ruins of Montreal's Expo 67 fairgrounds, the cast endured brutal conditions. Crew members whispered that Newman regretted taking the role, calling it career suicide. Yet in time, Quintet became a fascination for Altman devotees. Scholars unearthed its layered allegories about fate, chance, and the end of human ambition. Fans of post-apocalyptic cinema embraced it as one of the bleakest visions ever committed to film, though never. Restored to mainstream success, it grew into a cult artifact treasured for its strangeness. Today, Quintet resonates as a warning about humanity playing games while the world collapses around it, a metaphor that only grows sharper with time. Slaughterhouse 5, 1972. Kurt Vonnegut's beloved novel Slaughterhouse 5 was never going to be an easy adaptation. When the film premiered, critics praised its ambition, but audiences stayed away, confused by its nonlinear storytelling. Financially, it stumbled, overshadowed by simpler, flashier sci-fi. The narrative follows Billy Pilgrim, a man unstuck in time, drifting between his mundane life, his experiences as a World War II soldier, and his captivity by aliens on the planet Tralfamador. The film interweaves tragedy, absurdity, and cosmic fatalism, mirroring Vonnegut's unique voice. Censors didn't outright ban it, but distributors worried about its bleak view of war and humanity. Some international markets trimmed sequences, citing its surreal nudity and satire as too challenging. In the US, many theaters simply skipped booking it, claiming audiences weren't ready for such literary sci-fi. Behind the scenes, director George Roy Hill, fresh off Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, faced immense pressure. Translating Vonnegut's fragmented, sardonic tone was nearly impossible. Vonnegut himself, though critical at first, later admitted the film captured the spirit of his book better than he expected. But the marketing failed spectacularly. Audiences expecting a conventional war drama or a space adventure left disappointed. Over the years, its reputation grew. College students embraced it as a cult text, discussing its themes of free will, trauma, and fatalism. By the time Criterion restored it, critics hailed it as one of the more faithful literary adaptations of its era. Today, Slaughterhouse 5 feels hauntingly relevant, a reminder of how trauma distorts memory and how sci-fi can grapple with humanity's darkest scars. Its failure at the box office became its strange badge of honor. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. When The Andromeda Strain debuted, it seemed like a surefire hit. Adapted from Michael Crichton's best-selling novel and directed by Robert Wise, the man behind The Day the Earth Stood Still. But while it earned some respect, box office numbers were disappointing compared to its hype. The story follows a team of scientists investigating a deadly extraterrestrial microorganism brought back to Earth. In a secret underground lab, they race against time to contain the outbreak before it wipes out humanity. Its clinical realism, with long sequences of sterile labs and slow analysis, divided audiences. Censorship wasn't a major issue, but some theaters reported complaints that it was too frightening in its portrayal of government secrecy and biological disaster. In the shadow of Vietnam and Cold War paranoia, its themes of cover-ups and fragile systems struck a little too close to home. International markets were cautious, trimming some of the more disturbing medical sequences. Behind the scenes, Wise insisted on hyper-realism, consulting with NASA and scientists to ensure accuracy. This decision slowed pacing and alienated casual viewers, but impressed technical audiences. Some critics praised its authenticity, while others sneered that it felt like watching a medical training video. For years, it was largely forgotten outside of Crichton enthusiasts. But gradually, its reputation soared. Fans began to appreciate its methodical tension and icy style, especially as fears of pandemics grew. Modern filmmakers cite it as foundational hard sci-fi, inspiring everything from Outbreak to Contagion. Today, The Andromeda Strain feels more prescient than ever, its depiction of invisible threats echoing our own century's anxieties. What once seemed clinical now feels terrifyingly real. THX 1138, 1971. Before Star Wars made George Lucas a household name, he delivered THX 1138, and it bombed. Audiences walked out, critics were divided, and Warner Brothers executives panicked. The sterile dystopia of Lucas's first feature was too cold and too strange to succeed in 1971. The story unfolds in an underground city where emotion, individuality, and free thought are suppressed. Citizens are reduced to numbers, THX 1138 among them, drugged into compliance, stripped of identity, and policed by chrome-faced androids. When THX begins to resist, the system closes in. Censors weren't the main obstacle, confusion was. Distributors didn't know how to market the film. Some theaters labeled it art house only. Others quietly cut screenings short after abysmal attendance. Whispers spread that Warner executives regretted giving Lucas creative freedom. Behind the scenes, chaos brewed. Lucas clashed with studio demands for clarity, refusing to dilute his vision. Francis Ford Coppola, producing under American Zoetrope, begged the studio to support Lucas, but executives demanded cuts. Sequences were shortened, symbolism toned down. And yet, audiences still found it alienating. The film collapsed financially, nearly killing Zoetrope as a studio experiment. But time worked in Lucas's favor. After Star Wars, curious fans tracked down his forgotten debut, shocked by its intensity. Scholars later hailed it as a groundbreaking vision of dystopia, blending Orwell, Huxley, and Cold War paranoia. The restored director's cut further boosted its reputation. Today, THX 1138 stands as proof that failure can be the first step to greatness. Its sterile, haunting vision of conformity feels eerily alive in the age of surveillance and control. Westworld, 1973. Today, Westworld feels like a cornerstone of modern science fiction, inspiring a hit HBO series and endless discussion about AI. But when it premiered in 1973, it underperformed. Critics were lukewarm, box office numbers fell short, and MGM treated it as a curiosity rather than a major release. The story imagines Delos, a futuristic theme park where guests live out fantasies in lifelike environments, Roman world, medieval world, and Westworld, where gunslingers never miss. But when the androids malfunction, chaos erupts. Yul Brynner's relentless gunslinger becomes a precursor to the Terminator. Censors weren't the problem, expectations were. Audiences assumed it would be campy pulp. Instead, they were confronted with grim violence and chilling ideas about machines turning against their makers. Some theaters cut screenings after parents complained it was too disturbing for a popcorn picture. Behind the scenes, Michael Crichton faced resistance as a first-time director. The small budget forced him to innovate, inventing the earliest use of digital imagery for Brynner's pixelated point-of-view shots. Yet, MGM treated the film like a B-movie, undermarketed and rushed into theaters. Crichton himself admitted the studio had no idea what it had. Decades later, its influence became undeniable. From The Terminator to Jurassic Park, echoes of Westworld appear everywhere. Its slow-burn tension and prophetic themes finally earned the recognition it deserved, with scholars calling it the film that warned us about AI. What audiences once ignored has become a blueprint for techno-paranoia. The future they dismissed in 1973 has become chillingly close. The Omega Man, 1971. At release, The Omega Man was a modest earner, but still branded a disappointment. Critics sneered at Charlton Heston's stiff performance, calling the film a relic of pulp fiction. Many expected more, given its source, Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend, yet its vision was deemed too bleak and too strange. The story follows Neville, the last man in Los Angeles after biological warfare wipes out most of humanity. He fights against the family, pale, plague-ravaged mutants who reject technology and hunt him nightly. Neville clings to survival, science, and fading memories of civilization. Censorship wasn't harsh, but distributors worried about its dark religious undertones. Some international cuts softened the more disturbing scenes, reducing the mutants' menace. In America, audiences already weary of Vietnam and Watergate weren't ready for another tale of collapse. Behind the scenes, Heston pushed hard to make the project happen, following his success in Planet of the Apes. But production was rocky. The empty Los Angeles streets required costly shutdowns, and directors argued over tone. Critics mocked its mix of action, sermon, and philosophy. The box office faltered, and yet its legacy grew. Midnight screenings and home video made it a cult gem. Its influence rippled outward. George Romero cited Matheson's novel, and by extension, this adaptation, as inspiration for Night of the Living Dead. Later, I Am Legend would be remade multiple times, but fans still hail The Omega Man for its haunting atmosphere and prophetic message. Today, its imagery, Neville driving through silent cities, mutants chanting in the dark, feels more enduring than ever. The last man, once mocked, has become an icon of loneliness in a collapsing world. The 1970s gave us sci-fi that dared to fail, and in failure, these films found immortality. Once laughed at, now studied, once forgotten, now worshipped. They remind us that vision matters more than success. Which of these cult classics have you seen, and which deserve rediscovery tonight? Like, subscribe, and comment your forgotten favorite below.